Let's imagine you step out onto an open plain. The air is hot, the horizon is empty, and for a second it feels almost safe. You hear a distant rumble, and your brain files it away as thunder, or maybe some far-off waterfall. But the sound keeps getting clearer, heavier, like someone is drumming on the ground with a jackhammer. You might think, okay, giant dinosaur incoming. Cue the T-Rex. That's the script your brain knows. But what you actually find when you turn around is so much weirder. Racing straight at you is a bird that's 3 meters tall, all muscle and murder, its drumbeat footsteps shaking dust off the stones. Feathers whip in the wind along its neck and tail, not cute and fluffy, but tight and streamlined, like a sprinter's jersey. Its skull is the size of a suitcase, with a hatchet-shaped beak that curves down into a hooked blade. Sunlight flashes off that edge every time its head bobs. You feel the rhythm of its strides in your ribs before you really hear them, each one a low thud you can't ignore. You run. Of course you run. But this thing is built to sprint. Its legs are like coiled steel cables, each step eating up meters of ground. The sound behind you turns into a rapid-fire drum solo. Gravel spits against your calves. A shadow slides over you as its body looms closer, blotting out the sun for a second, like a low-flying plane made of bone and feathers. You risk a glance back, and that beak is all you see. The hook glinting, the eyes locked on you with the cold focus of something that has never once worried about being prey. Air slams past as it lunges, and for a heartbeat, your whole world is just pounding feet, hot breath, and the razor edge of that hatchet coming down. Cut. This isn't a fantasy game. This is the world of Earth's past, reconstructed from real fossils. And yes, these guys are all real. Phorusrhacids, terror birds, 3 meters tall and very done with seeds and worms, actually ruled as top land predators in parts of South America. And they weren't alone. Let's imagine you dive into dark coastal water to escape, only to see a giant penguin torpedoing up from below, taller than you and moving like a guided missile. Out at sea, bony-toothed birds with wingspans bigger than a small plane are dive-bombing seals, their jaws lined with jagged spikes. Overhead, a colossal eagle drops out of the clouds onto a giant flightless bird, predator versus predator in a screaming explosion of feathers. See, for a brief, very real chapter in Earth's history, birds didn't just sing in the background. They became the dominant killers on land and sea. So how did the sky start hunting everything else? Why did that age of avian apex predators end? And what does it reveal about what happens after a mass extinction deletes the old monsters overnight? So, to figure out how birds ever got that job, you have to rewind to the single worst Monday the planet has ever had. Let's imagine it's 66 million years ago and you're standing on a Cretaceous beach. The sky is bright. Pterosaurs are cruising overhead. Mosasaurs are cruising under the waves. And somewhere inland, a T-Rex is doing T-Rex things. Then, on the horizon, a second sun appears. You don't get a dramatic countdown. You just get flash-burned. An asteroid the size of a small city slams into what's now Mexico, and the world basically catches on fire. Shockwaves trigger earthquakes and tsunamis. Superheated debris rains back down, igniting global wildfires. Within hours, the planet is wrapped in smoke and dust so thick that daylight just turns off. You might think that's the worst part, but what you actually find is that the real killer is time. Weeks turn into months of cold, toxic twilight. Plants stop photosynthesizing. Food chains that looked so huge and stable suddenly snap. On land, the big showy dinosaurs that depended on endless greenery and giant prey. Gone. Non-avian theropods, hadrosaurs, sauropods, all the celebrity reptiles. Exit stage left. In the oceans, it's the same script. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs vanish. Many giant predatory fish crash. Ammonites, which had survived multiple previous disasters, finally tap out. The top floors of both land and marine food webs just empty. This is the world of apex vacancies. And yes, these guys are all real casualties. What's left is not the impressive stuff you see in museum murals. It's the scrappy background characters. Tiny generalist mammals that can eat pretty much anything. Small birds that can switch from seeds to insects to carrion without complaining. Crocodilians lurking in rivers, able to sit and wait because their metabolisms are basically on airplane mode. Some sharks and tough little fish hanging on in the murky, nutrient-poor seas. It's not a heroic survival montage. It's a planet on life support, stocked with creatures that win mostly by being boringly flexible and very hard to kill. But evolution loves that. If you can eat lots of things, live in lots of places, and make babies fast, you get a ticket to the recovery party. So here's the big evolutionary question. When you delete almost every large predator overnight, who gets promoted? Which of these survivors will race to fill those empty apex slots on land, along coasts, and out in the open ocean? You might think mammals were always the obvious answer because, well, look around you. But right after the impact, they're mostly mouse-sized snack packs hiding in the undergrowth. Birds, though, they've got a secret head start. Even at the end of the Cretaceous, they're already diverse, already experimenting with different beaks, diets, and lifestyles. Some can run, some can dive, some can soar. Give that toolkit a few million years and some ecological breathing room, and suddenly scaling up into giant, bone-crunching monsters is on the table. The old monsters are gone. The niches are open. And evolution is about to ask, what happens if you turn the descendants of small, nervous birds into the new tyrants? To see the answer, you have to step into the Paleocene and Eocene, where the first bird superpredators start to appear. So, if evolution just deleted the old bosses, why did birds, of all things, get a shot at becoming the new ones? You might think the survivors would be the last big, scary reptiles lurking in some swamp, waiting to reclaim the throne. But what you actually find at the end of the Cretaceous is a lot of small, kind of unimpressive birds. Let's imagine you're walking along a late Cretaceous shoreline. You've got little ground birds darting between ferns, shorebirds poking around in the mud, and scruffy, crow-sized things snapping up insects. Most of them are eating seeds, bugs, tiny lizards, maybe the occasional fish. No one here looks like a future terror bird. They look like nervous background characters. But those background characters had the exact toolkit you want when the sky literally falls. Small bodies meant they didn't need much food, which is a huge deal in a world where photosynthesis just got punched in the face. Many of them could fly, or at least run and hop quickly, so they could escape fires, tsunamis, and collapsing ecosystems. And they had flexible diets, seeds, carrion, insects, whatever still moved or hadn't rotted yet. They'd eat it. See, being a picky specialist is great in a stable world. It's terrible in an apocalypse. The giant dinosaurs were the definition of specialized. Huge herbivores needed endless forests and fern plains. Apex predators like tyrannosaurs needed those herbivores in bulk, and they took years to grow, with slow reproduction. When the food web crashed, their giant bodies became a liability. Big stomach, no buffet. Birds went the opposite route. They laid lots of eggs, fast. If even a few chicks survived, the lineage kept going. High reproductive rates meant they could bounce back in numbers, while larger animals were still trying to get 1 or 2 offspring to adulthood. And yes, these guys are all real. Early modern bird lineages that basically rode out the end Cretaceous like scrappy disaster preppers. But that doesn't mean they woke up the next morning as 9-foot murder ostriches. For a while, birds were just survivors filling in the small jobs. Scavengers, insect hunters, seed crushers. This is the world of ecological triage, where anything that can eat almost anything gets a head start. The important part is that they were still around when the dust cleared. Once plants recovered, insects exploded back, and small mammals started multiplying. Those modest little bird bodies became raw material for evolution to start getting weird with. Longer legs here, heavier skulls there, wings that trade flight for speed or power. So, what happens if you keep pushing that tiny, efficient bird blueprint bigger and bigger and meaner? Well, you eventually get lineages that turn hollow-boned, flighty frames into bone-crushing, mammal-hunting machines. And in some corners of the new Cenozoic world, those machines would rule like dinosaurs with feathers. But to see just how far birds took it, and how close they came to becoming the new tyrants of land and sea, you have to meet the monsters they evolved into next. So let's imagine you hit play on Earth's history and skip to the aftermath of the dinosaur apocalypse. The big reptiles are gone, the old bosses are dead, and for a weird, glorious stretch of time, the monsters that rise to the top are birds. This is the world of what we'll call the Avian Apex Age, roughly the early to mid-Cenozoic, say from about 60 to 20 million years ago, when on land, along coasts, and even out in the open ocean, the scariest thing in the neighborhood was more likely to have feathers than fur or scales. You might think that sounds like some clickbait exaggeration, but what you actually find in the fossil record is a whole run of bird lineages muscling their way into top predator jobs. And that's the paradox. Birds are supposed to be light, hollow-boned, built to fling themselves into the sky. So why, in this window of time, do they keep doing the exact opposite? Again and again, you see them bulking up, grounding themselves, and trading glidey, harmless seagull vibes for heavy, bone-crunching, sprint after you and end your day energy. It's like evolution got access to the bird blueprint and said, "Cool, but what if we made it huge and angry?" See, this wasn't just one rogue experiment on one lonely continent. In South America, you get the terror birds, phorusrhacids, pushing 3 meters tall with skulls the size of your torso and beaks shaped like hatchets. On remote islands, you have giant flightless ducks and eagle owls turning into land tyrants because no big mammals show up to stop them. Along ancient coastlines, penguins stretch past human height, hunting big fish and squid in cold, predator-poor seas. And out over the open ocean, bone-toothed birds with 6 or 7 meter wingspans patrol the waves, snapping up anything unlucky enough to be near the surface. And yes, these guys are all real. So this is not one fluke family going off the rails. This is birds, on multiple continents and in multiple habitats, independently climbing to the top of food webs. Land, shore, offshore, even polar waters. If there was a vacant apex slot, at some point in the Avian Apex Age, a bird seems to have at least auditioned for it. Which raises the big question we actually care about. What specific combo of extinction chaos, shifting continents, weird climate, and bird biology made this brief era possible? Why was this the only time in Earth's 4 billion-year story when birds could pull off being the main super predators, and why did that experiment end? To answer that, we're going to walk through the case files one by one. First, the South American terror birds, sprinting down mammal prey on an isolated continent. Then the giant penguins of cold southern seas, and the ocean-cruising bone-toothed birds that turned the sky into a hunting ground. Each of them is a clue to how the Avian Apex Age started, and how it finally broke. So, to open the first case file, you actually have to leave the modern world behind and drop into a continent that barely exists anymore. Not on a map, but in the way it worked. Early Cenozoic South America wasn't just down there under the equator. It was a giant island continent, adrift and alone. Let's imagine you're standing on it about 50 million years ago. To the north, no land bridge to North America. To the east, the Atlantic is already a wide, deep moat. To the west, the Pacific is just as bad. Africa, Asia, those future factories of big cats and dogs, completely out of reach. You're on a sealed evolutionary test island the size of a continent. You might think isolation would make things small and harmless, like a giant petting zoo of weird rodents. But what you actually find is that when a continent is locked away for tens of millions of years, evolution starts running its own private experiments. No tigers, no wolves, no bears coming in to claim the top slots. So the predators you do have? They get creative. See, on this South American island world, the usual mammal heavyweights never show up. The only mammals around are early placentals and marsupials, plus a bunch of strange hoofed things and oversized rodents trying to figure out life. You get some carnivorous marsupials, sure, and they can be nasty. But they're not giant, fast, long-legged pursuit hunters. They're more like sneaky ambushers and opportunists. Down by the rivers and swamps, crocodilians are doing their eternal crocodile thing. Lurking in the water, exploding out in short bursts, dragging whatever comes too close into the mud. They're scary, but they're not sprinting across open plains after you. On the ground, most mammals are small to medium, nervous, and busy not getting eaten. The niche of a tall, land-running, high-speed killer? Weirdly empty. And this is the world of the phorusrhacids, terror birds, ground-dwelling, flightless birds that start out not much bigger than a modern eagle, and then scale up like evolution sat on the Enhance button and walked away. Long legs built for speed, stiff tails for balance, and skulls that start looking less like bird and more like portable guillotine with feathers. Well, once nothing else is competing for that role, natural selection just keeps pushing them bigger and faster. Because why stop at large when you can be nightmare-sized? Over millions of years, some phorusrhacids turn into towering 3-meter monsters with beaks designed to slam down and chop through struggling prey like it's overcooked pasta. And yes, these guys are all real. One of them had a skull over half a meter long, literally bigger than a human torso, attached to a sprinting bird body. Imagine that shadow falling over you on an open plain, knowing you can't fly, you can't hide in the water, and your best defense is be slightly faster than your friend. So, what does it actually look like when that thing is hunting you? To find out, we need to meet the most infamous terror bird of them all. Up close. Let's imagine you're standing on that open plain, heart pounding, and you finally turn to face the thing casting that shadow. You might think you're about to see some kind of off-brand T-Rex, but what you actually find is a bird. A 3-meter-tall bird that looks like an ostrich someone modded for boss fights. This is the world of phorusrhacids, the terror birds. In the scientific papers, they get the serious name, phorusrhacids, but the nickname stuck because, well, look at them. Up to 3 meters tall, With long, absurdly powerful legs built for sprinting, wings shrunk down to useless little arm stubs, and a skull that's almost cartoonishly huge. Some species had beaks nearly 60 centimeters long. That's basically a sword growing out of your face. See, the whole body plan is streamlined around one job: run you down and break you. Those long legs? They're not for graceful jogging. They're for hitting serious land speeds across open ground, like a murder ostrich that never skipped leg day. The wings are reduced because they don't need to fly when the entire strategy is be a fast, angry neck on stilts and let the head do the real work. And that head is where things get scary. The beak isn't just long, it's hooked at the tip like a raptor's claw, with a deep, reinforced base and neck muscles anchoring into the back of the skull. You're looking at a built-in hatchet. And yes, these guys are all real. Fossils show thickened bone where those impact forces would travel, which tells you exactly what evolution was planning here. So what are they using that living battle axe on? Not just tiny snacks. Terror birds were probably going after medium-sized mammals, juvenile ungulates, anything dog to small horse-sized that made the mistake of being out in the open. Smaller animals too, sure, because if you can kill it with one hit, why not? But these weren't just overgrown vultures picking at leftovers. They were making the leftovers. Let's imagine an attack sequence. You're a young herbivore, minding your own business, and suddenly you hear pounding footfalls behind you. The terror bird sprints, head held level, closing the gap like a feathery missile. Then, a few meters away, it does something awful. It stops. All that momentum transfers forward into the neck and skull as it snaps the head down in a hatchet-like blow, driving that beak straight into your side or skull. One hit to stun or kill. Then the hooked tip and lower jaw start tearing flesh away in quick, vicious bites. Functionally, it's like a mix between a cheetah and an axe-wielding ostrich. Same role big cats fill today, just with fewer teeth and way more beak. You might think that sounds inefficient, but the fossil record says otherwise. So, if land birds could do this, what happened when birds took that same apex energy out over the oceans? So, take that cheetah ostrich with an axe for a face, and now crank everything up again. Bigger body, bigger bite, and a skull that honestly looks like it got lost on its way to a T-Rex. This is where Kelenken walks in. Kelenken guillermois comes from Miocene Argentina, around 15 million years ago, and it is one of the largest terror birds we've ever found. You might think, okay, big bird, whatever. Emus are tall, but what you actually find is something that makes emus look like nervous chickens. Kelenken stood around 3 meters tall, but the real horror show is up top. Its skull. Let's imagine you're holding this thing. Kelenken's skull is over 70 centimeters long. That is one of the largest bird skulls ever discovered, longer than many human torsos. The beak is deep, reinforced, and hooked at the end like a built-in tomahawk. And behind that beak? Huge attachment sites where jaw muscles once anchored in, telling you this animal did not gently nibble on anything. See, a skull like that completely changes how you hunt. With a regular bird, the beak is a tweezer. With Kelenken, it's a sledgehammer on a pogo stick. Instead of wrestling prey with teeth, it could drive that beak down in rapid, targeted strikes, focusing all that force into a small area. Bone-cracking blows to the skull, spine, or limbs, then quick follow-up jabs to tear off chunks. It's not just pecking, it's precision demolition. And yes, these guys are all real. The legs back this up. Kelenken's limb bones are long, with strong muscle attachments, but they're not the thick, slow, weightlifter legs of a pure bulldozer. They're more like a sprinter's, built to move fast over open ground. So instead of lurking like a vulture or waddling around as a lazy scavenger, this thing was probably chasing down medium-sized mammals in broad daylight. Active pursuit predator. On 2 legs, with a murder helmet for a head. You might think something this huge had to be clumsy, but the proportions say otherwise. Long shins, rigid, stabilizing tail, center of mass pulled over the hips. This is a bird that could actually run, then slam on the brakes and deliver a single, decisive strike. Functionally, it's playing the same game as a big cat, just with fewer moving parts and way more momentum. So, how do you get here? How does a lineage that likely started as small, maybe omnivorous ground birds in South America end up as Kelenken, the giant, hyper-specialized land missile with a built-in war pick? And why does this keep happening on this continent in particular, while birds elsewhere mostly stay in the cute and edible lane? To answer that, you have to zoom out from one skull and look at an entire island continent where mammals showed up late, and evolution basically handed birds the keys. So, what does a bird have to look like to pull that off? To walk onto a continent full of mammals and say, "Actually, I'm in charge now." Let's imagine you're standing eye to eye with Kelenken, trying very hard not to blink first. You might think the danger is all in the beak, but what you actually find is that the real horror starts at the feet. Those legs are long, but not flimsy stork legs. These are columns of dense bone with huge muscle attachment scars, built like a sprinter crossed with a jackhammer. The joints lock in a way that screams forward power, so each stride is a giant, ground-eating step, not a dainty bird hop. See, when paleontologists model the forces on those limb bones, they get something wild. These birds could probably accelerate fast, then slam that leg down in a stomping kick hard enough to knock a dog-sized mammal sideways. They're not just running you down. They're built to control you once they reach you. But the real engineering flex is higher up, in the neck and spine. If you're going to use your face as a weapon, your backbone has to play along. Terror birds have thickened cervical vertebrae with big flared surfaces where neck muscles would anchor. It's like evolution wrapped a crane cable in feathers. Every time that beak comes down, the shock has to go somewhere, and it travels into a reinforced S-curve of bone and tendon that can reset for the next hit. Pattern interrupt. Picture a woodpecker. Tiny bird, ridiculous neck muscles, skull built to survive headbutting trees all day. Now scale that concept up to a 3-meter land predator that's doing woodpecker physics on moving, screaming targets. Up front, the beak is not just sharp. It's a hatchet with opinions. The upper bill is deep and laterally compressed, thick through the base so it doesn't snap, then tapering to a hooked tip. That shape is perfect for a downward chop that bites in, then a twist and pull that turns flesh into strips. They probably didn't chew. They just hacked chunks off and swallowed them whole. And yes, these guys are all real. The skull openings show huge spaces for jaw muscles, so when that hook closed, it wasn't a gentle peck. It was more like a clamp, pinning prey long enough for another strike. Look at the skull again, and you'll notice those big eye sockets. This is the world of daylight ambush. Large, forward-biased eyes suggest sharp vision, scanning open, often dry landscapes for anything that twitches. You're not dealing with a nocturnal skulker. You're dealing with something that can track you across a sun-baked plain and judge exactly when to sprint. Well, here's the weird part. Every piece of this anatomy is a compromise. Hollow bones and feathers say bird, but the proportions scream land carnivore. They can't fly, so the wings shrink into balance tools. The tail stiffens for stability instead of steering in the air. It's evolution trying to turn an airplane into a cheetah using only the parts already in the box. So when you put it all together, legs, spine, beak, senses, you don't just get a big bird. You get a custom-built, mammal-hunting apex predator. But how do we know what these murder ostriches actually did with that toolkit, and what it felt like to live in their world? You might think the answer is just big bird go chomp, but what you actually find is a whole continent quietly setting the stage for them. Because for a long stretch of time, South America was basically an island, cut off, drifting with its own weird experiment in mammals and birds. Let's imagine you drop into South America around 50 million years ago. You're expecting packs of dog things, maybe early cats, some familiar fast, furry killers sprinting around. But you look across this landscape and no wolves, no big cats, no hyenas. The mammal lineup is mostly small to medium herbivores and omnivores, plus some very confused hoofed things that look like they were designed by committee. So who's actually scary out here? That's where the terror birds walk in. Phorusrhacids start small right after the dinosaurs check out, but they scale up into these giant 2 to 3 meter murder ostriches before any serious placental carnivores ever make it onto the continent. Timing is everything. By the time the future dogs and cats even hear about South America, the birds already own the top floor. And birds can move fast on the evolutionary dial. They lay lots of eggs, they grow quickly, and they already come preloaded with high-end hardware, crazy good eyesight, fast reaction times, light but strong skeletons built for speed. You don't have to reinvent a predator from scratch. You just take a sprinting ground bird and keep cranking the size knob bigger and bigger until it can punt a dog-sized mammal across the savanna. See, once those giant birds grab the apex slot, they don't just sit there. They start shaping everything else. Any small mammal that even thinks about evolving into a big, fast hunter has to run a gauntlet of already elite bird predators. Your proto-dog pops its head up, smacked by a hatchet beak. Your experimental cat thing tries to chase something in the open, outrun and disemboweled by a bird that's been perfecting high-speed ground combat since the age of dinosaurs. That's evolutionary momentum. The more terror birds specialize, the harder it is for competing predators to get a foothold, because they're being suppressed while still small and vulnerable. Mammals in South America mostly stay in the safer zones, digging, climbing, chewing plants, maybe nibbling insects, but not challenging the bird bosses head-on. And yes, these guys are all real. For millions of years, this is the world of bird-dominated food webs, where the shadows you fear aren't cats in the grass, but birds on the horizon. It feels stable. It feels locked in. But nothing in Earth's history stays locked in for long, because far to the north, another continent is getting crowded with hungry, fast-breeding mammal carnivores. And when a skinny strip of land finally rises to connect those two worlds, you're about to watch what happens when the bird empire collides with the mammal invasion. So while mammals are busy pouring over that land bridge like an invasive carpet of teeth, something very different is happening in the places they can't easily reach. The islands, the broken-off scraps, the continents that sailed away before the mammal arms race really kicked off. Let's imagine you zoom out on a map of this new mammal world and start circling the outliers. Long, skinny archipelagos, remote plateaus, big chunks of land surrounded by a lot of cold water. You might think they're just side quests in the story, but what you actually find is that these are the laboratories where evolution goes completely off the rails. Ecologists call it the island rule. Take a landmass, cut it off from the main action, and starve it of big mammal carnivores. No lions, no wolves, no saber-toothed anything. On those isolated stages, birds and reptiles don't just survive. They start applying for the job of top predator. And yes, these guys are all real. See, when you delete big mammals from the system, the whole food web has to reshuffle. Something still has to eat the plant eaters. Something still has to be the thing everything else is afraid of. On islands, that something is very often a bird that got bigger, meaner, and way more confident than any bird has any right to be. And nowhere shows this better than New Zealand. For tens of millions of years, this place is basically a continent-sized test run of, what if we just didn't have land mammals? Native land mammals bigger than bats? Zero. You walk inland and it feels wrong. No deer, no antelope, no coyotes, just a lot of plants, a lot of insects, and a lot of birds quietly realizing they've won the lottery. So, who steps into the grazing, browsing, bulk-eating role that cows or antelope would handle anywhere else? Giant, mostly flightless birds called moa. Some species over 3 meters tall, huge drumstick legs, long necks, heads buried in the foliage like living cranes on stilts. They're not hunters, they're the walking salad bars. But as soon as you get giant herbivores, you get a new problem. What hunts the walking salad bars? This is the world of island apex birds. You've now got a landscape full of big, slow, tasty targets and absolutely no mammal carnivores to cash in. That combination, large herbivorous birds plus no big mammals, is like an open casting call for the most dramatic bird-predator evolution can throw together. Well, New Zealand answers that casting call with something that looks like a glitch. A raptor that doesn't just pick off chicks or rabbits, but regularly goes after animals several times its own weight. Imagine a bird built like a golden eagle that someone hit scale up on, then pointed at a 200-kilogram moa and said, "Good luck." In other words, a feathered big cat with wings is about to show up. And once it does, those peaceful moa aren't just grazing in a forest anymore. They're walking through an invisible kill zone patrolled from the sky by Haast's eagle. So, let's imagine you're one of those peaceful moa, just doing your best salad impersonation in a New Zealand forest. The air is quiet. No big cats, no wolves, no bears. You might think this is actually a pretty safe neighborhood. But what you actually find, if you could look up at the right horrible moment, is Haast's eagle dropping out of the sky like a thrown anvil with feathers. This bird, Hyraetus murray, was not just a slightly bigger hawk. We're talking a wingspan pushing 3 meters, with a body mass rivaling, and in some cases beating, the heaviest eagles alive today. In a world where the largest native land mammals were basically bats and tiny rodents, this thing was the closest New Zealand ever got to a flying lion. And yes, these guys are all real. Haast's eagle specialized in hunting giant moa that could weigh up to 200 kilograms, so you've got a predator that's maybe 10 to 15 kilograms, routinely taking on prey more than 10 times heavier than itself. How many land predators today do that on purpose? This is the world of bird physics going completely off the rails. Its hardware was built for that job. The talons on Haast's eagle were about the size of a tiger's claws, curved hooks of bone and keratin thick enough to crush through tough joints. Its leg bones were massively reinforced, like someone took an ordinary eagle and hit "Add extra rebar" in the skeleton menu, because those legs had to absorb the impact of a high-speed collision with a sprinting bird the size of a refrigerator. See, the beak wasn't just for show either. It was a heavy, hooked can opener designed to rip through thick muscle and skin once the moa was down. But the real killing blow came from below. Let's imagine the hunt. The eagle waits on a forest perch or cliff edge, almost invisible. The moa wanders past, head down, busy being a walking buffet. Then the eagle drops. No warning screech, no dramatic flapfest. Just a silent stoop, wings tucked, accelerating fast, then a brutal slam into the moa's back. Those talons drive deep into the pelvis or spine, clamping over bone like living bear traps. With its weight and momentum, the eagle can topple the moa, pinning it while the spinal cord or major blood vessels are crushed or torn. For the victim, it's over in seconds. And remember, on the ground, there is no wolf pack coming to finish the job. No big cat lurking in the grass. In this ecosystem, the deadliest land hunter wasn't a mammal at all. It was a bird, and everything that walked under open sky lived under that shadow. So what happens when you give birds that kind of power not just on islands, but across whole continents and oceans? So, let's imagine you're standing in that shadow. But it's not the same kind of monster every time. Sometimes the top killer comes screaming out of the sky. Sometimes it just walks up to you on two legs the size of fence posts. On one path, you get Haast's eagle, a flying guillotine strapped to a pair of talons. It keeps the classic raptor body plan. Broad wings, relatively light skeleton, just barely light enough to haul itself into the air. You might think that makes it fragile, but what you actually find is a bird that turned flight into a three-dimensional ambush. It waits above forest clearings, folds those huge wings, and drops like a missile onto giant moa that can't even take off. On the other path, you get the terror birds of South America. These guys basically looked at flight and said, "Nah, we're good." They sacrificed wings for legs, trading lift for horsepower. Over millions of years, their arms shrank into little stabilizers while their bodies went all in on size and speed on the ground. Some terror birds stood around 3 meters tall with a 60-centimeter skull and a beak shaped like a battle axe. They didn't swoop. They sprinted. See, that's the trade. If you give up flight, you can get heavier, thicker, and way more robust. You can stack on dense leg bones, giant neck muscles, reinforced vertebrae. You become a running sledgehammer that can kick, stomp, and slam prey into the dirt. But if you keep flight, you unlock a different kind of power. You can patrol a much wider hunting range, scan from above, and attack from angles ground animals literally can't defend against. One strategy is all about being a tank. The other is about being a drone strike. And yes, these guys are all real. What's wild is that both strategies needed the same starting conditions. You need a world with almost no large mammalian carnivores on the ground. No big cats, no wolves, no hyenas waiting to steal your kill. You also need abundant big prey. Giant moa in New Zealand, oversized mammals, and other big birds in South America. Take away the usual mammal bullies, add a buffet of large, slow targets, and suddenly birds get promoted from annoying feathered things to apex land predator. Well, this isn't just one weird corner case. South America and New Zealand ran this experiment completely independently. Different continents, different climates, different bird lineages. Same outcome. Giant, murderous birds at the top. This is the world of evolutionary copy-paste. When you line up the conditions, birds keep finding their way to the throne. So, if they can dominate forests and open plains like this, what happens when birds aim that same logic at the oceans? What does an apex bird look like when the hunting ground is thousands of kilometers of open water instead of a valley or an island? You're about to meet them. Let's imagine you're not on land anymore. You're bobbing in a warm Paleocene ocean, a few million years after the asteroid, and you look down expecting the usual Mesozoic nightmare. Giant reptiles with too many teeth rocketing up from the dark. You might think the water would still be ruled by mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. But what you actually find is an empty throne. Those reptile kings? Gone? The last mosasaur has already choked on dust and darkness. The long-necked plesiosaurs that cruised coastlines for over 100 million years? Wiped. A bunch of the big, fast, predatory fish that used to slice through schools like living torpedoes? Also gone, or massively reduced. Even some shark lineages at the top of the food web just vanish. The asteroid didn't just delete dinosaurs on land, it basically pulled the plug on the whole marine boss roster. So early Cenozoic oceans feel weirdly underpowered. You still have sharks, but they're mostly smaller, more modest models, not the oversized movie villains you're picturing. You still have teleost fish everywhere, but now they're often the ones getting bigger, filling mid-level roles instead of constantly dodging reptile jaws. Air-breathing speed demons, the things that charge up from below or ambush from the surface, are in short supply. For a while, the sea is rich in food, but poor in monsters. And yes, these guys are all real. Survivors like small to medium sharks, rays, and a whole lot of bony fish. Down in the background, you've got the early experiments in marine mammals just starting to happen. Little hoofed things tiptoeing into the shallows, proto-whales that still have legs, seals that are basically confused dogs with flippers. They're not yet the giant streamlined hunters you know. They're awkward interns in an ecosystem that suddenly has way too many open positions. See, if you zoom in on coastal and surface waters especially, it gets almost comical. You've got huge schools of fish and squid, plankton blooms feeding entire food chains, and relatively few big, fast predators cashing in. The deep sea is still dangerous, but the upper layers? It's like someone stocked the buffet and forgot to invite half the guests. For millions of years, the oceans are running a sale on unclaimed niche, apex hunter, must be comfortable getting wet. So who's already perfectly set up to exploit that air-sea gap? Not mammals? Not yet. But birds. Birds can fly long distances cheaply, see into the water from above, and dive straight through that surface barrier. They're already comfortable living on cliffs, islands, and coasts. This is the world of the air-sea interface, and birds basically come pre-installed with the right toolkit. Well, give evolution a few million years of that situation, and things start to get weird. Because when the seas are full of food and short on monsters, the sky starts manufacturing them. The next predators to rule the oceans don't swim like sharks. They fly. So, what kind of monster do you get when the sky starts building its own sharks? You don't get a fish. You get a bird the size of a small plane that hunts like a missile. This is the world of the Pelagornithids, the bony-toothed birds. You might think that sounds like some nerdy museum label, but what you actually find is a whole family of giant seabirds with wingspans up to 6 or even 7 meters. That's rivaling the biggest modern albatrosses, and some species probably beat them. Imagine looking up and seeing a shadow that's basically bus length, and it's not a cloud, it's hungry. Let's imagine you're out on an early Cenozoic ocean, bobbing on a tiny raft in cool, open water. The surface looks calm, no dorsal fins slicing past, no giant reptile heads popping up. You relax a little. Bad idea, because the apex predator cruising this neighborhood isn't under you. It's above you. Pelagornithids had these long, almost comically stretched beaks, but lined with something much worse. Rows of sharp, bony spikes fused to the jaw. Not real teeth, but close enough that if you were a fish, you would not care about the technical difference. These pseudo-teeth turned the entire bill into a natural fish grabber, perfect for clamping onto slippery, thrashing prey that would just slide right out of a normal bird's beak. See, modern albatrosses are already incredible. They lock their wings and glide for hours across cold oceans, just casually flexing on every airplane engineer. Now scale that up, give it a bigger wingspan, and bolt on a mouthful of bony grappling hooks. That's a Pelagornithid. Functionally, it's like an albatross, and a gannet had a giant, slightly cursed baby. They spent their lives soaring over vast stretches of sea, riding wind currents, barely flapping, just scanning. Spot a fish or squid near the surface. They'd swoop down, skim the water, and snatch it in a split second. Some researchers think they may have grabbed small marine vertebrates too, not just little baitfish. If it fit in the beak and moved, it was probably on the menu. And yes, these guys are all real. We have the bones, including those weird spiky jaws. In many early Cenozoic seas, if you were hanging out near the surface, the biggest thing hunting you was not a shark, not a dolphin, not some leftover marine reptile. It was a bird with a wingspan longer than a pickup truck, patrolling the air like a circling guillotine. Well, once birds start owning the open ocean like that, you have to ask, what happens when they step fully onto land and don't even need wings to be terrifying anymore? So, how do you actually hunt like a flying guillotine with a 7-meter wingspan? Let's imagine you're not under this thing. You are this thing. First problem? Wings. You might think bigger wings just mean you flap harder and go faster, but what you actually find in Pelagornithids is the opposite. These wings are long, narrow, and locked into infinite glider mode. This is the world of dynamic soaring. You're carving up and down through wind layers over cold, rough seas, stealing energy from the air itself so you barely have to flap. Albatrosses do this today, but these birds are like the maxed-out DLC version. Once you're up, you can stay up for hours, maybe days, just patrolling. That giant wingspan isn't just for show, it's a hunting platform. From tens of meters up, you're scanning the surface for flashes of fish, squid, or anything unlucky enough to be near the top. Then you angle down, fold those huge sails just enough not to crash, and skim the surface like a low-flying missile. Now the fun part, the beak. Modern seabirds mostly have smooth, toothless beaks. Great for grabbing, not great for, you are never leaving my mouth again. Pelagornithids bolt bony pseudo-teeth along the edges of the beak, like someone tried to cosplay a crocodile with bird parts. They're not real teeth, but they turn the entire jaw into a spiky clamp. Hit a school of fish at speed, snap shut, and those prey items don't just slide out like with a slick beak. They get pinned between spikes while you shake off water and swallow them whole. And yes, these guys are all real. Fossils show those pseudo-teeth running almost the full length of the jaw, perfect for catching slippery, soft-bodied squid that would just squirt right out of a normal bird's mouth. Size does even more work. A bigger body gives you momentum to punch through waves and wrestle larger prey near the surface. It also gives you intimidation power. See, if you're a smaller seabird and a 7-meter shadow drops in, you're not arguing over who owns that dying fish. Pelagornithids could have bullied other birds mid-air, stealing catches in classic kleptoparasite fashion, because when you're that huge, please share becomes, that's mine now. Food web-wise, you're sitting high. Most fish, below you. Smaller marine reptiles, snacks. You're probably competing with early marine mammals, big sharks, maybe even juvenile whales for the same shoals of fish and squid. This isn't some cute coastal gull. This is an apex or near-apex predator that just happens to breathe air. But here's the catch. Hyper-specialized giants are amazings in the wind, temperature, and oceans all line up. What happens when currents shift, winds weaken, or prey dives deeper to escape warming surface waters? That 7-meter wingspan that once made you unstoppable might suddenly become a very expensive luxury. And evolution does not run loyalty programs for frequent flyers. So what happens when evolution takes that go big or die energy and gives it to penguins? Let's imagine you dive off the coast of Paleocene New Zealand, thinking you're about to meet some cute, stubby tuxedo birds. You might think the worst thing down here is a slightly aggressive fish. But what you actually find is a black and white torpedo rocketing past you that is almost as tall as you are. This is the world of giant early penguins. Names like Kumimanu, Anthropornis, and Kairuku sound like boss fights because they kind of were. Kumimanu from New Zealand shows up just a few million years after the dinosaurs check out, and it's pushing well over 1.5 meters tall, with a body mass several times an emperor penguin. Some Anthropornis species in Eocene Antarctica probably broke the 2-meter mark. That's penguins at small forward in the NBA height. And yes, these guys are all real. We're talking birds built like refrigerators with flippers, cruising through cold, nutrient-rich southern oceans that hadn't yet filled up with modern sharks and toothed whales. The big marine reptiles are gone, the food web is rebooting, and penguins look around and go, "Guess we live here now." When the competition is mostly medium fish and a few early mammals, a 2-meter bird suddenly looks like apex predator material. See, those giant bodies weren't just for show. Their skeletons tell you they had thick, heavy bones that acted like built-in dive weights, letting them sink fast and stay submerged. Their flippers were long, stiff hydrofoils, slamming through the water with each stroke. Imagine a flying bird, but all the lift is turned sideways into thrust. You're not out swimming that in a Paleocene ocean. Now give that engine a weapon. Many of these penguins had long, spear-like beaks with strong neck muscles. Not the cute banana beak you're picturing from a zoo poster, but a straight, stabbing spike designed to grab and wrench around sizable fish and squid. In a world with few big marine predators, that combo of power, streamlining, and a built-in harpoon puts you at or near the top of the trophic ladder. Let's imagine you're snorkeling over an ancient continental shelf. Visibility just a little murky. Sunlight fading fast. A shadow moves below you. Your brain politely supplies shark because that's what you've been trained to fear. But rising out of the gloom is a penguin the size of an NBA player, accelerating with every flipper stroke, eyes locked on something just behind you. So, for a brief window, the scariest thing in those southern seas wasn't a reptile or a mammal. It was a bird in a wetsuit. But penguins weren't the only avian nightmares testing out the top of the food chain. If you step back onto land, the story gets even weirder. So, let's imagine you climb back out of the water, catch your breath on some lonely Eocene shoreline in the far south, and then look back at that ocean. Because the real monster factory here isn't just the birds, it's the water itself. Cold southern oceans are like overclocked buffets. You might think freezing water would be dead and empty, but what you actually find are nutrient fire hoses. Strong winds and currents yank deep, nutrient-rich water up to the surface, and in the long polar day, you get these ridiculous seasonal blooms of plankton. That's the base of the food web going absolutely feral. More plankton means more krill, more fish, more squid, and more of everything that eats them. You stack that productivity year after year, and suddenly the southern shelves and subpolar seas are packed with dense schools of prey. If you're a predator with a good wetsuit and a decent brain, this is the jackpot. Now drop this productivity spike right after the end Cretaceous extinction. All the big classic sea monsters are gone. No mosasaurs, no plesiosaurs, no giant marine crocodiles. Fully aquatic mammals? The early whales are only just starting to experiment with flippers and blowholes. Sharks are around, but a lot of the truly huge forms we know today haven't taken over yet. The top of the food chain is basically a "help wanted" sign. Who walks in first? The birds that were already breeding on coasts and islands. See, they're commuting from land anyway, nesting on safe cliffs and remote rocks, then raiding the water for fish. It doesn't take much evolutionary imagination to push that hunting route farther offshore. Dive a little deeper. Stay out a little longer. If the food is everywhere, you can afford to get bigger. Way bigger. Early penguins in these southern oceans did exactly that. Some stood close to human height, built like torpedoes with feet. Pelagornithids, the bony-toothed birds, stretched their wingspans out to 6 or 7 meters, gliding over cold swells and just scooping prey off the surface. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of polar gigantism meeting post-extinction opportunity. You might think this is a weird one-off, but the pattern sounds familiar, right? Even today, cold, nutrient-rich waters tend to support bigger-bodied animals. Antarctic krill swarms, huge baleen whales, chunky fish, oversized invertebrates. It's the same rulebook. Cold water holds more oxygen, slows metabolism, and when the food is good, lets bodies get large without instantly starving. Well, that bird-ruled ocean was never going to last forever. As marine mammals refined their swimming and sharks evolved faster, tougher designs, the arms race in those same productive waters started to tilt. The question is, what happens when whales and sharks finally crash this avian party? So were birds actually running the show, or are we just hyping up some oversized pigeons? To answer that, you need to know what apex predator really means. In ecology, it's not just big and scary. It's the adult animal at the top of a food web, with no regular predators of its own. If something eats you only by accident or when you're already half dead, you still count as apex. You might think that means birds had to own every ecosystem to qualify. But what you actually find is messier and way more interesting. This isn't a cartoon pyramid with one perfect murder bird sitting smugly on top. It's a tangled web where birds often share top billing with crocodiles, giant snakes, or the occasional ambitious mammal that figured out legs plus teeth is a pretty good combo. Let's imagine you're on the ancient South American plains 20 million years ago. The biggest land hunter in view? Not a cat, not a wolf, a 3-meter-tall terror bird, long legs, 60-centimeter skull, and a beak shaped like a hatchet. These phorusrhacids weren't just big. They're showing up in fossil sites with broken bones of grazing mammals and smaller predators, cut marks on limb bones, smashed skulls, bite forces modeled from their beaks. Everything screams top-down killer, not oversized scavenger. Shift scenes to New Zealand's forests. You're a giant moa, basically a walking sack of meat on stilts. Above you, Haast's eagle circles with a wingspan up to 3 meters and talons the size of a tiger's claws. Nothing hunts the adult eagles. Isotope chemistry from their bones lines up with them feeding almost entirely on big herbivores. This is the world of a bird that functioned like a scaled-down flying lion. And out at sea, birds didn't exactly sit back either. Early Cenozoic oceans had Pelagornithids, those bony-toothed birds with wingspans rivaling or beating modern albatrosses, plus penguins up to 2 meters tall. In some coastal and polar systems, sharks and marine mammals were still small or rare, so the biggest things routinely grabbing large fish and squid were, again, birds. Their bones show marine nitrogen signatures way up the food chain, and we literally find fish skeletons and squid beaks piled where these birds nested. Well, were they alone at the top? Not always. In some rivers and coasts, big crocs were doing their own apex thing. In certain forests, early mammal carnivores or huge constrictor snakes absolutely held their own. But the weird part is how often birds independently muscled into that top slot. South American plains, New Zealand bush, Antarctic-adjacent seas, island cliffs full of giant petrels and albatrosses. Birds kept climbing to the apex across totally different habitats. And yes, these guys are all real. Fossils, isotopes, chewed bones, healed injuries on prey animals, they all point the same way. Adult birds in these lineages basically had no consistent natural enemies. So the big question isn't, were birds ever apex predators? It's, how did a world where they kept winning that role get flipped back into a mammal and shark planet? So if birds really did keep winning that top spot, what were the cheat codes? Because this didn't happen randomly. Every time birds took over, the same hidden rules kept popping up. First one is brutal. Something has to delete the old bosses. You might think you can get an apex bird just by evolving a slightly bigger hawk, but what you actually find is that as long as giant mammal or reptile predators are around, they sit on that throne and they do not share. After the end Cretaceous hit, non-avian dinosaurs and marine reptiles were gone overnight in geological terms, and suddenly the board reset. On islands with no native mammals, in polar seas with no sharks, it's the same vibe. The usual monsters are missing. Second rule, the buffet has to be loaded. Terror birds in South America only work because they're surrounded by medium to large prey mammals. Giant penguins only get huge because the early Cenozoic oceans are stuffed with fish and squid and almost no fast marine mammals yet. If you've got nothing bigger than insects, you don't get a 3-meter bird with a 60-centimeter skull, you get a cranky seagull. Third, the world can't be totally chaotic. Let's imagine you're an evolving bird lineage trying to specialize into a giant, bone-cracking murder machine. You need climates that are stable enough, for long enough, to let you fine-tune that beak, that stride, that ambush style. When temperatures and sea levels are whiplashing every few thousand years, being a weird specialist is a good way to die fast. See, this is the world of birds are weirdly perfect for these windows. They evolve fast. They lay a lot of eggs. Mutations that make you a bit taller, a bit faster, a bit better at tracking movement with those already insane eyes can spread through a population quickly. Wings and feathers that started as tools for flight and insulation double as shock absorbers for high-speed chases or as stealth cloaks for gliding over prey. Their brains are already tuned for complex behavior, so dialing that into pack-like hunting or clever ambush tactics is actually not a huge jump. And timing is everything. Birds often get to these empty niches first. Mammals are still small, still mostly nocturnal, still figuring out how to not be snacks. By the time big cats or orcas are even on the evolutionary drawing board, some bird lineages have had tens of millions of years of practice being the problem. But that dominance is fragile. Apex birds tend to be big, slow breeding, and hyper-specialized. A new land bridge forms, a current shifts, a smarter mammal shows up with better teeth, and suddenly that giant beak is just an expensive liability. So if we can see the rules that let birds rise, the real mystery is, what broke those rules so hard that almost every giant bird empire on Earth collapsed? And who, or what, pushed them off the throne? So, what broke the rules? In this case, it wasn't some mysterious new bird or a secret weapon beak upgrade. It was a bridge, a really inconvenient one, If you were a giant, bite first, ask questions, never tear a bird. Around 3 million years ago, the planet quietly did some continental carpentry and raised the Isthmus of Panama out of the ocean. One day, North and South America are separate evolutionary arenas. Then suddenly, you've got a solid strip of land stitching them together. And once that land bridge locks in, it's game on. Because now, all the things South America had been blissfully missing for tens of millions of years can just walk in. Let's imagine you're a top predator terror bird down there. You've got the open plains, weird native mammals that mostly run or freeze, and almost no big placental carnivores breathing down your neck. You might think your biggest problem is the occasional larger cousin moving into your territory. But what you actually find, once that bridge forms, is an entire new roster of killers heading south. Big cats with retractable claws and slicing teeth. Pack-hunting canids that look suspiciously like early wolves. Bears rolling in with raw power and zero respect for local traditions. Sleek mustelids. Think giant weasels and Wolverine-adjacent chaos, slipping into every spare niche. And yes, these guys are all real, and they show up with a completely different playbook. See, mammalian predators are annoyingly flexible. Many can switch between hunting and scavenging, go after different sizes of prey, and in some cases hunt in groups, which a solo terror bird really does not appreciate. They nurse their young, invest heavily in fewer babies, and raise them with built-in hunting lessons. Terror birds hatch as fluffy murder chicks with potential, but they're still basically on the clock from day one. This is the world of the great American biotic interchange, and from the bird side, it's less fun science term, and more, oh no, the neighbors brought lions. Competition ramps up fast. Mammals can chase prey into dense cover, wrestle it down with forelimbs, and bite in ways beaks just don't. They can also eat a wider menu when times get bad, which really matters in a changing climate. Fossils tell you how that arms race went. Before the land bridge, South America is packed with multiple terror bird species, from smaller sprinting forms to true giants. After the big carnivores arrive, that diversity starts thinning out. Lineages disappear. The last holdouts shrink in range and eventually blink out entirely. Once large placental carnivores could cross into South America, the conditions that let birds rule the land were basically done. The experiment of giant, ground-dwelling bird apex predators had run into something faster, hungrier, and harder to out-adapt. But if birds lost the throne on land, you might wonder, did they have any empires left to defend? Maybe somewhere the mammals still couldn't follow. So, why did the age of killer birds on land end the moment serious mammal carnivores showed up? You might think it was just bigger teeth beat big beaks, but what you actually find is a whole stacked deck of advantages that mammals brought with them. First, senses. Terror birds were visual missiles. In open grasslands, a 3-meter phorusrhacid with razor-sharp eyesight is a nightmare. But drop that same bird into a dense forest or a cold, moonless night, and it's suddenly playing on hard mode. Mammals, meanwhile, evolved this overpowered combo of smell and hearing. Wolves, early big cats, even those weird hyena-like creodonts could track prey by scent through thick vegetation, hear tiny footsteps in the dark, and keep hunting when a bird's main weapon, vision, was basically turned off. Let's imagine you're a small herbivore in this world. Daytime. You're scanning the horizon for a giant bird sprinting at you. Nighttime. You're listening for paws in the leaf litter and breathing as quietly as you can. Mammal predators didn't just turn off at sunset. A lot of them only really clocked in once it got dark. That ties into metabolism and behavior. Birds are already warm-blooded and high energy, but giant ground birds were mostly solo, sprint, and smash hunters. Mammals went in a different direction. Pack hunting shows up again and again. Dog-like mesonychids, early canids, later big cats. Groups can test prey, harass it, chase it into ambushes, and take down animals way bigger than any one hunter. So, a lone terror bird might be terrifying, but a coordinated pack of mid-sized mammals can be worse over time. And mammals just spammed habitats. Forests, scrub, mountains, cold nights, hot days. Someone with fur and good lungs moved in. Birds that relied on long sightlines and dry, open ground suddenly had less and less territory where they were the undisputed boss. Reproduction is another quiet game changer. Many big mammals invest a lot in fewer offspring, with long childhoods and extended care. That's not just, cute baby mammoth. It's a training program. Young predators learn routes, ambush spots, pack roles, even which prey are worth the risk. Complex social behavior makes hunting more efficient and more flexible, and it's really hard for a mostly solitary, specialized bird to keep up with that kind of evolving playbook. Then you get to the hardware. Mammal jaws are basically multi-tools. Teeth for slicing meat, crushing bone, shearing tendons, gnawing cartilage. They can strip a carcass down and live off parts a beak struggles with. Terror birds had insanely strong beaks for hatchet strikes and tearing, but they were still more specialized cutting tools than full shredders. See, once large, flexible mammalian carnivores arrive, they don't just compete. Over evolutionary timescales, they edge giant birds out of most apex jobs. But that doesn't mean birds gave up everywhere. So, where do you go if you're a killer bird trying to dodge this furry takeover? You island hop. You run to places the mammals can't easily swim to, and you build your own private food web. For Haast's eagle, that sanctuary was Aotearoa, New Zealand. Basically the final boss of bird islands. Let's imagine you arrive here not as a tourist, but as a moa. No land mammals bigger than a bat, no big cats in the bushes, just forests full of giant, two-legged walking buffets. Moa up to 3 meters tall, hundreds of kilos each, just wandering around like feathery cows. Above them, the Haast's eagle, a flying guillotine with talons the size of a tiger's claws and a grip strong enough to punch straight through bone. For thousands of years, this worked. Birds were the herbivores. Birds were the scavengers. Birds were the apex predators. This is the world of a fully bird-run ecosystem. You might think that kind of setup would be fragile, but what you actually find is that it was amazingly stable, right up until a very specific primate showed up with boats and pointy sticks. Roughly 700 to 800 years ago, Polynesian navigators reached New Zealand. These were people who could cross the open Pacific using stars, swells, and memory alone. And they didn't arrive empty-handed. They brought fire, they brought dogs, they brought rats, and they brought new hunting tools that the local birds had literally zero evolutionary experience with. See, moa had only ever been hunted by one thing, a single giant eagle dropping from above. If you stayed alert in open country, you at least had a chance. But humans attacked from every angle. Spears, traps, coordinated drives, burning patches of forest to flush birds out. It was like swapping one boss fight for an entire raid party. Moa numbers crashed fast, on human time, not geological time. In just a few centuries, we took a continent-sized flock of giant herbivores and basically erased them. And when you delete the main prey base in a system that simple, the apex predator is on a timer. Top predators like Haast's eagle are always living on the edge. They're few in number because each one needs a huge territory. They reproduce slowly because raising a giant high-performance murder bird takes a lot of energy. And their metabolisms are tuned for big, calorie-dense meals, not chasing sparrows. You can't just swap a 200-kilo moa for a couple of ducks and call it a day. So, as the moa vanished, Haast's eagle followed. Within a short window after humans arrived, the entire bird-dominated apex system that had ruled New Zealand for millennia just snapped. Gone. And yes, these guys are all real. We've pulled their bones out of caves and swamps. But this wasn't just a New Zealand tragedy. It was a preview. Once humans start island hopping around the globe, any bird sitting on top of an island food web, giant owls, huge hawks, oversized vultures, runs into the same triple hit: hunting, habitat burning, and hungry new mammals eating their prey and their eggs. So if birds could lose whole continents and then lose their last strongholds on islands, what finally shuts the door on the age of bird apex predators everywhere, even at sea? So if birds are getting knocked off their thrones on land and islands, you might think, fine, they'll just retreat to their old stronghold, the ocean. Giant penguins, bony-toothed gliders, albatrosses with wings like sailplanes. Birds used to own the waves. But what you actually find, once you zoom into the Cenozoic seas, is that the water has started growing its own monsters. Let's imagine you're hovering over a warm Eocene shoreline, 45 million years ago. Below you, something that still kind of looks like a crocodile with flippers paddles past. This is an archaeocete, an early whale, and evolution is about to drag it fully offshore. Over a few million cold, salty years, the legs shrink, the tail sprouts a fluke, the nostrils crawl up the skull, and suddenly you've got fully aquatic whales that never touch land again. At first, they're just big fish eaters sharing space with diving birds. But give them time. Those early whales split into two very different beasts: baleen whales that vacuum up entire clouds of krill, and toothed whales that go full submarine predator. Sperm whales, beaked whales, early killer whale-like dolphins. This is the world of deep-diving sonar torpedoes that can chase squid a kilometer down where light basically doesn't exist. Birds can dive, sure. Penguins are great. But they're still airframes wrapped around lungs and feathers. They hunt in the top few hundred meters, and they've got to pop back up for air constantly. Whales can load their blood with oxygen, slow their hearts, and vanish into cold black water for an hour. That opens up huge new hunting space, bigger prey, deeper prey, and year-round access to food that never comes near the surface. And whales aren't the only ones muscling in. While birds are trying to keep their grip on coastal fish, modern sharks are quietly running a Cenozoic startup boom. Lineages like requiem sharks and makos diversify into sleek, warm-bodied missiles. Some, like the megatooth sharks, go absolutely off the rails and scale up into bus-length hunters chewing on young whales. At the same time, big predatory teleost fish, tunas, billfish, giant groupers turn midwater into a high-speed, high-metabolism war zone. See, once you've got sharks, toothed whales, and giant fish all patrolling from the surface down into the deep, the easy buffet that once fed giant penguins and bony-toothed birds starts looking a lot more crowded. Competition for fish and squid turns brutal. Every school of prey is now being hit from above by birds, from the sides by sharks, and from below by marine mammals. And yes, these guys are all real. As sharks and marine mammals get bigger and more diverse, the math stops working for giant seabirds. You can't just be a huge flying net anymore, because the ocean is now full of things that are faster, can hunt at night in deep water, and don't have to waste energy taking off. By the late Cenozoic, the scoreboard is clear. In most oceans, the top killers are sharks and marine mammals. Birds are still important. Surface raiders, plunge divers, clever kleptoparasites. But they're no longer the final boss. So what finally finishes off? The last of the truly giant seabirds and penguins, and locks in this new order for good. So if sharks and whales have taken the crown, what's the final shove that knocks the last giant birds off the throne? To answer that, you have to zoom way out. Not thousands of years, tens of millions. Let's imagine you've got a time-lapse slider for the whole Cenozoic. Early on, after the dinosaurs check out, the planet is warm. Not nice beach day, warm. Palm trees in the Arctic, warm. CO2 is high, the poles are mild, and the oceans are like a giant, fairly stable buffet. That's when Pelagornithids and giant penguins really go wild, because the rules aren't changing every few thousand years. But then the slider creeps forward, and the world starts to cool. Slowly at first, then harder. Antarctica drifts over the South Pole, gets locked in, and ice sheets explode across it. Around 34 million years ago, you suddenly have a frozen continent and a very different ocean. Currents reorganize, cold deep water wells up, and global sea levels drop. You might think cooler oceans are no big deal for birds that already like cold water, but what you actually find is that it scrambles everything they depend on. When sea level falls, wide, shallow continental shelves turn into exposed rock. That means breeding beaches vanish, coastal lagoons shrink, and those comfy, productive feeding zones where anchovies and squid used to pile up, gone or shifted hundreds of kilometers. For a huge seabird that nests only on certain cliffs, or a 2-meter penguin that needs specific ice-free land to haul out, this is brutal. They can't just pick up and commute across an ocean basin every time the shoreline moves. Big, specialized species usually have slow reproduction, narrow breeding ranges, and very particular prey. When climate starts playing musical chairs with coastlines and temperature bands, they're the ones left standing without a seat. And it doesn't stop. After Antarctic glaciation, the late Cenozoic turns into climate whiplash. Ice ages slam in. Ice sheets grow. Sea levels drop. Then warm interglacials melt them back and drown coasts again. Rinse and repeat, over and over. This is the world of advancing and retreating shorelines, shifting upwelling zones, and prey belts migrating north and south like they're on rails. Meanwhile, marine mammals and modern seabirds are diversifying like crazy. Fossils show Pelagornithid diversity peaking in the warm early Cenozoic. Then, sliding as seals, dolphins and baleen whales explode in number, and climate swings get stronger. Giant penguins tell the same story. Lots of big forms early on, then a trend toward smaller, deeper diving, more flexible species as competition and climate chaos ramp up. See, bird apex predators do best in worlds that are stable and isolated. Big, quiet southern oceans with few mammals, or islands where nothing big with teeth has arrived yet. The Cenozoic starts out like that. But by the time you hit these wild ice age cycles, the planet is basically an obstacle course. So what happens when that same climate chaos finally reaches the last strongholds where birds still rule the top of the food chain? What happens is, the birds lose. Not all at once in some dramatic slow-motion extinction montage, but piece by piece, continent by continent, as new players show up with bigger teeth and way less chill. You might think terror birds just failed somehow, like evolution tried the whole giant murder ostrich thing and then gave up. But what you actually find is that the rules around them changed. Those stable, quiet worlds where a 3-meter bird could stomp around on top of the food chain? They get invaded, first by large mammalian carnivores, then by humans, and finally by everything humans drag along with them. Let's imagine you're a big, ground-hunting bird in late Cenozoic South America. For tens of millions of years, this is the world of terror birds and other weird mammals, mostly doing their own thing. Then the Isthmus of Panama rises, North and South America connect, and suddenly you're sharing the neighborhood with saber-toothed cats, giant wolves, and bear-sized raccoons that did not come here to make friends. See, mammals bring a very different toolkit. Pack hunting, night vision, fast reproduction, teeth that can crunch bone. Over and over, once large mammalian carnivores arrive on a continent, big predatory birds either get pushed into smaller niches, retreat to islands, or vanish entirely. Australia gets its marsupial lions and giant monitor lizards. Africa and Eurasia get hyenas, big cats, and wild dogs. Even Antarctica's seas fill up with toothed whales and seals. The map slowly saturates with mammals that are already really good at being apex predators. And yes, these guys are all real. We still have large flightless birds today. Ostriches, emus, cassowaries. But look at what they actually do. They're herbivores or omnivores, sprinting away from danger, not running toward it. An ostrich can kick a lion in self-defense, sure, but it's not patrolling the savannah looking for zebra to dismantle. The top predator slot is already taken by mammals, so big birds are stuck playing the role of nervous, high-speed snacks. Any giant, ground-dwelling bird that tries to push back now hits a new wall: us. Humans arrive with spears, then dogs, then agriculture, then habitat fragmentation. Forests turn into farms and roads. Big, slow-breeding animals that need huge territories are suddenly living in a patchwork of fences and highways. A 2-meter predator bird standing in an open field is basically a walking, free food sign for people, dogs, and later, rifles. So, under modern conditions, the window for terror bird-style apex predators on land is basically closed. Mammals dominate the killing things niche, humans dominate the changing the rules niche, and any big bird that survives does it by not being a giant, obvious hunter. But if birds can't rule the land anymore, where do they still quietly bend the food web around themselves in ways you almost never see coming? So, if birds can't bully mammals on land anymore, you might think they'd just retreat to their old stronghold, the ocean. Giant penguins, bone-toothed sky demons, birds reclaiming the sea like it's 50 million years ago. But what you actually find when you look at modern oceans is, they already got taken. Because while birds were having their brief apex era, something else was quietly leveling up in the background: marine mammals and sharks. Fast, warm-blooded, turbocharged killers. Today, in almost every major ocean basin, the real top predators aren't birds at all. They're orcas coordinating hunts under Antarctic ice, leopard seals patrolling penguin colonies like mobile guillotines, and great white and mako sharks slicing through the upper layers of the sea. Let's imagine you're a penguin trying to compete with that. You're streamlined, sure. You can rocket through cold water at highway speeds for a few seconds. But an orca can dive deeper, stay down longer, and sprint faster, all while carrying a built-in oxygen tank in its blood and muscles. Marine mammals cheat. They bring mammal lungs, mammal metabolism, and mammal insulation into a world that used to belong to fish and birds. See, diving is where birds really hit a wall. A penguin has to surface to breathe way more often than a seal. It can't store as much oxygen, it loses heat faster, and its muscles fatigue sooner. That means huge chunks of the deep ocean food web are just off limits. Sperm whales can chase giant squid a kilometer down. Elephant seals vanish into the mesopelagic for over an hour at a time. A bird body simply can't follow them into that dark, high-pressure buffet. So modern penguins get squeezed into a middle lane. They're amazing mid-level hunters of fish, squid, and krill, but they're also prey. Leopard seals rip them apart. Killer whales flip them like snacks. Even big sharks will happily remove a curious penguin from the gene pool. If you try to scale a penguin up into a 2-meter apex monster today, you don't get a terror of the seas. You get a very visible, very tasty target. And those old bone-toothed birds and giant penguins, they probably didn't vanish for one simple reason. Climate cooled and currents shifted, changing where nutrients and fish schools piled up. Prey communities reorganized. At the same time, toothed whales, seals, and modern shark lineages were exploding in diversity. Suddenly, those big birds were facing faster hunters, deeper divers, and more competition for the same prey, all while their environment was getting less stable. Well, seabirds are still crucial marine hunters. Albatrosses rule the open-air sea interface. Penguins dominate certain coasts. Petrels and gannets hit like feathered missiles. But the age when birds could sit unchallenged at the very top of ocean food webs is long gone. The sea is a mammal and shark world now. So if birds still want to bend the rules, they have to do it somewhere else entirely. So, if the oceans are off the table, where do birds still push their luck? You just look up. Because on land and in the air, you're still living under a quiet little shadow war of talons and beaks. Let's imagine you're a rabbit on a windy hillside. You might think your biggest problem is the fox sneaking through the grass, but what you actually find is worse. A golden eagle silently folding its wings and turning you into airborne takeout. These birds hit hard. Golden eagles will slam into foxes, marmots, even small deer. And yes, these guys are all real. Crowned eagles in Africa routinely hunt monkeys. Harpy eagles drag sloths out of trees like it's a vending machine. Owls do the same thing, but from the night shift. Great horned owls yank skunks, rabbits, even other owls off their perches. Snowy owls take ducks and hares on open tundra. On paper, a big owl is basically a flying bobcat with better hearing. A lot of adult raptors don't have regular predators once they're full-sized. If you're a healthy bald eagle, almost nothing is hunting you on purpose. But here's the catch. Modern raptors are apex-ish. They sit near the top of local food webs, but they're capped. They're big for birds, not big for apex predators. A golden eagle isn't tackling full-grown elk. A harpy eagle isn't wrestling jaguars. Their prey range tops out at medium mammals and the occasional unlucky juvenile of something larger, because physics and feathers only get you so far. And the reason that ceiling exists is fur. Mammalian carnivores moved in and locked down most of the true apex slots. Wolves, big cats, bears, wolverines, and, awkwardly, you. This is the world of shared dominance, where an eagle can kill a fox, but a wolf pack can show up 5 minutes later and just steal the whole carcass. People have filmed wolves casually muscling golden eagles off their own kills. You might think the sky always wins, but on the ground, teeth usually beat talons. Humans make this even weirder. We shoot, trap, and poison raptors, then also accidentally feed them with roadkill, landfills, and cities full of pigeons and rats. So a red-tailed hawk can rule a highway median, but it's doing that inside a human-designed ecosystem, where the real apex decisions are being made by zoning boards and hunting regulations. See, modern birds of prey are like living postcards from that earlier Avian Apex Age. They show you how terrifying birds can get when they lean into predation, but they're also reminders of the limits. Today, they're powerful, but constrained. To find birds that actually broke past those limits and tried to become land's top killers again, you have to rewind the clock. Way back to when evolution let a different kind of bird go fully off the rails. Because here's the twist you're not really taught in school. Those birds going off the rails? They weren't just like dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs. You are still living in the age of dinosaurs right now. You just call them sparrows and seagulls instead of velociraptor. Let's imagine you could peel back the feathers on a terror bird or a giant eagle and overlay it with a Jurassic Park-style wireframe. What pops out is that familiar theropod body plan. Bipedal stance, 3 main toes gripping the ground, long S-curved neck, the same basic blueprint that built Velociraptor and, by extension, T-Rex, just wrapped in plumage instead of scales. You might think the asteroid drew a hard line, non-avian dinosaurs on one side, birds on the other, cut, roll credits. But what you actually find is that birds are just the avian branch of the dinosaur family tree that happened to squeak through the disaster. When terror birds were stomping across South America, that wasn't some new experiment. That was dinosaurs quietly reclaiming the top job after their bigger, toothier cousins checked out. See, once the end Cretaceous extinction wiped out the big non-avian theropods, it left a lot of empty predator seats. No more T-Rex, no more giant marine reptiles cruising the coasts. Into that silence stepped their feathered relatives. Phorusrhacids grew up to 3 meters tall, with skulls the size of your torso and a beak shaped like a hatchet. They hunted like scaled-down tyrannosaurs, kicking, grappling, and then driving that beak straight down into prey the way a raptor would slam a sickle claw. And it wasn't just on land. Out at sea, bony-toothed birds with 6-meter wingspans skimmed the waves, snapping up fish and squid with serrated beaks where teeth used to be. Early giant penguins, as tall as a person, rocketed through cold water after big fish like torpedo-shaped mini mosasaurs. This is the world of dinosaur descendants quietly running the show while most mammals were still trying to figure out how legs work. Well, evolution did have to make some swaps. Teeth are heavy and grow slow. So many of these avian predators leaned into sharp, keratin beaks instead, powered by ridiculous neck muscles. But the behavior? The vibe? Very familiar. Ambush attacks, pursuit running, grappling with claws, then a killing blow from the head. You're basically watching smaller, feathered versions of the same hunting strategies that ruled the Cretaceous. So the age of dinosaurs didn't really end. It morphed. It thinned down, sprouted feathers, and moved into an age of birds, where the last great predatory dinosaurs briefly took center stage again. And yes, these guys are all real. The monsters stalking ancient South America and New Zealand were not just birds. They were the final act of dinosaur apex evolution. But if dinosaurs, in bird form, managed to claw their way back to the top, why didn't they stay there? So if birds already had their shot at being land's final bosses, could they do it again? Could you actually get a second age of killer birds stomping around while mammals sit on the bench? Let's imagine what evolution would need to pull that off. First, you need space. Huge, mostly connected land masses, or really big islands where mammals either never arrive, get wiped out, or are stuck being small, harmless bug eaters. Then you need prey. Lots of large, slow, calorie-dense animals wandering around with no idea they're about to become lunch. Give that combo a few million years, and you've basically written a love letter to giant, fast-running, bone-smashing birds. You might think that sounds ridiculous, but what you actually find in the fossil record is that this almost happened multiple times. South America with terror birds. New Zealand with giant eagles dive-bombing moa. Islands with giant owls that were basically feathered linebackers. Every time big mammal carnivores are missing, birds start quietly sharpening the beak. So, what could reset the board now? One option is the classic, a mass extinction that hits mammals harder than birds. Maybe a disease that jumps between furry animals, or a climate disaster that wipes out large placental predators but leaves many birds and smaller reptiles. Birds are already good at riding out chaos. They fly. They migrate. They can shrink their territories fast. If they walk away with more species and more bodies than the mammals, they suddenly own the starting lineup. But here's the catch. You're not living on a quiet, isolated continent anymore. You're living on planet human. We move everything, everywhere, all the time. And yes, these guys are all real. Rats on islands, cats in bird colonies, pigs on remote atolls, invasive snakes in tropical forests. Any place that even starts to look like a safe, mammal-free playground for birds tends to get surprise introduced to a hungry stowaway in a shipping container. On top of that, the climate isn't just changing, it's changing fast. Giant apex specialists need stability, predictable seasons, reliable prey, slow environmental drift. What they're getting instead is heat waves, habitat fragmentation, and food webs being yanked around by us. This is the world of collapsing niches, not cozy, untouched ecosystems where a bird can calmly evolve into a 3-meter murder turkey. Pattern interrupt. Some birds are absolutely trying anyway. Certain caracaras already act like tiny, chaotic land predators, bullying everything smaller than them. Fossils show island owls that reached near eagle size and probably hunted other birds and small mammals at night. They're impressive. They're scary. But they're not even close to terror bird scale. So, could killer birds evolve again? In theory, yes. Evolution doesn't lose the recipe. But the exact mix that created the first avian apex era, mass dinosaur extinction, long isolated continents, low mammal competition, and stable climates is incredibly specific. And right now, humans are scrambling the settings so hard that giant bird overlords are probably off the menu. Which leaves a different question. If birds aren't becoming the next top predators, what is? So, if giant bird overlords are off the menu, what did that brief avian reign actually show us? Let's imagine you could rewind Earth like a VHS tape and pause right after the asteroid hits. Dinosaurs are gone. Giant marine reptiles are gone. Whole food webs just snap. What happens when you delete the bosses but leave the rest of the game running? That's called ecological release. You might think evolution politely waits a few million years and then slowly fills in the gaps, but what you actually find is a mad scramble. Surviving lineages suddenly have access to all this space, all this food, all these empty jobs in the ecosystem, and the ones that can adapt fastest explode into those niches. Birds were perfectly placed for that moment. Light bones, high metabolisms, flexible diets, flight. They were like Swiss Army knives in a world that had just lost all its hammers. See, right after the end Cretaceous, mammals are still mostly small, skittish, and nocturnal. Reptiles took a huge hit. The oceans have lost their giant mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. On land and at sea, the top spots are just sitting there. So you get terror birds in South America, 3 meters tall with skulls the size of your torso, turning open plains into their personal hunting grounds. You get Pelagornithids with 7-meter wingspans patrolling coastal waters that don't yet have modern sharks and whales muscling in. And yes, these guys are all real. Early giant penguins are waddling around at almost your height, diving into cold, predator-poor seas and going after big fish and squid because, honestly, who's going to stop them? For a while, birds aren't just filling side roles. They're running the show. This is the world of ecological release pushed to its extreme. When the usual winners are gone, the weird contenders suddenly look like genius solutions. But that window doesn't stay open. As climates shift, continents reconnect, and mammals finally get bigger and bolder, the food web rewires again. Big cats, dogs, seals, and toothed whales start competing for the same prey. Being an apex bird turns out to be both powerful and fragile because you sit on top of a very tall, very wobbly pyramid. Knock out your prey, change the ocean currents, dry out a hunting plane, and your whole lifestyle collapses. So, what does that mean for you right now, in a world where humans are speed-running extinctions? When we erase top predators today, or wipe out whole chunks of the food web, we're basically hitting the same reset button. Ecological release is going to happen again, just with a different cast. Maybe not giant murder geese, but something equally strange. The real lesson from the Avian Apex era is how fast the rules can flip when you shock the system. If birds could go from background characters to global super predators, and then back again, who's quietly waiting in the wings this time? So, let's imagine that someone waiting in the wings is you. You're not in a city. You're in Miocene South America. Open scrub, patches of forest, hot wind. You might think your biggest problem is whatever's lurking in the bushes, but what you actually find is that the real danger is the sky. You don't just glance around. You scan up. Constantly. You walk the same game trail your ancestors have used for thousands of years, but your eyes keep flicking to the horizon, because that's where the giant shapes appear. A line of low hills, a stand of trees, and then, on the ridge, something taller than a person. It tilts its skull. The beak catches the light. That's not scenery. That's a terror bird. This is the world of avian apex predators, and your whole nervous system is wired differently. Modern you is trained to fear rustling grass, snapping twigs, the feeling of being followed. Miocene you is trained to fear silence, a shadow that moves when nothing else does. The sudden dimming of the sun as something huge crosses between you and the light. See? A big cat announces itself with growls, scent, footprints. A bear crashes through undergrowth. Even a croc needs you to come to the water. But a 3-meter phorusrhacid? It can jog along the slope, above your line of sight, then drop into a sprint you never hear until talons hit your back. Or worse, its smaller, faster cousin is already paralleling you through the scrub, waiting for you to step into the open. Now, shrink yourself down. You're a medium-sized mammal, maybe dog-sized, maybe smaller. You actually do everything right. You stay low. You freeze when you smell danger. You avoid open ground at midday because it's hot and exposed. But your main predators can see you from hundreds of meters away with vision that makes hawks look nearsighted. You slip between shrubs, and a dark shape glides over the ground in front of you. Just a shadow. No sound. Your brain fires off alarms before you even know why. You bolt for cover, and a hooked beak hits the spot where you were half a second ago. Attacks don't come with roaring charges. They come as vertical edits. One frame you're alone, the next frame is feathers and impact. And yes, these guys are all real, or at least they were. On the coasts, bony-toothed birds with wingspans longer than a car patrol the surf, stooping on fish and juvenile marine mammals. In cooler seas, giant penguins rocket up from below, turning the water column into a three-dimensional minefield. From your perspective, the planet itself feels weaponized from above. Today, we fear big cats on trails, bears in campsites, sharks in the shallows. We tell kids to watch the water, not the clouds. In a bird-ruled world, every instinct flips. Fear has a beak and feathers. Safety is not get to high ground. High ground is where the hunters stand. And the strangest part, this all really happened, and our mammal-centric experience is the weird phase. So what does a sky full of killers do to the rest of the ecosystem? So if fear has a beak and feathers, how do we actually know it wasn't just in our heads? Let's imagine you're a paleontologist trying to prove that a 3-meter bird really did sit at the top of the food chain. You don't get video, you get bones, and the bones are loud. First clue: body size and hardware. You might think a giant bird is just a scaled-up ostrich, all legs, no bite. But what you actually find in terror birds and their relatives are skulls almost as long as your torso, with beaks shaped like a hatchet crossed with a can opener. The neck vertebrae are reinforced for violent downward strikes. The legs? Thick, pillar-like bones with huge muscle scars and claws that are basically meat hooks. That combo screams, "I don't run from things. Things run from me." And yes, these guys are all real. When you compare their limb proportions and joint shapes to modern birds, they line up most closely with pursuit hunters and ambush predators, not seed-eaters. Bigger hip joints for powerful kicks, stiff tails or backs for balance during impact, even beak tips built to puncture or slice. You can actually estimate prey size from this. If the head is big enough to grab a dog-sized animal and the legs are built to tackle it, you're not talking about a polite insectivore. But bones don't just show shape. Inside, the chemistry keeps receipts. Fossil bones and even teeth from the mammals around them can be run through isotopic analysis, looking at different flavors of nitrogen and carbon. Top predators tend to sit higher in nitrogen-15 because they're eating other meat-eaters or big herbivores. When you test terror birds, giant penguins, and those bony-toothed seabirds, their signatures sit right up there with apex hunters, not in the middle of the web. Pattern interrupt. What about poop? Yes, we are absolutely reading fossilized bird droppings to figure this out. Coprolites from big predatory birds are stuffed with shattered bone fragments and fish scales, not seeds or soft plant mush. Some skeletons of ancient mammals and penguins even have beak-shaped punctures or parallel gouges that match the spacing of those giant jaws. In a few rare fossils, you get stomach contents still in place: whole fish, chunks of smaller birds, even juvenile mammals. Then you zoom out. Trackways show big bird footprints pacing alongside and sometimes on top of herding mammals. In coastal rocks, you get layers where giant penguins, prey fish, and almost no large marine mammals occur together, a classic predator-dominated assemblage. See, habitat use isn't a guess when you can map who's standing where. So, this isn't just imagination or some bird fan fantasy league. Independent lines of evidence, morphology, chemistry, bite marks, poop, tracks, whole ecosystems, keep pointing to the same answer. This is the world of feathered apex predators. Which raises the next problem. If birds really did run the show, what finally knocked them off the throne? So, if birds really did get a turn on the throne, you might think they finally got to be what T-Rex never could be: untouchable, apex, invincible, end of story. But what you actually find when you zoom in on the fossils is bite marks, big ones. Let's imagine a terror bird skeleton laid out in a museum drawer. The bones look massive, clean, powerful. Now cut to the original version, 10 million years ago, half buried in a South American riverbank. Some of those leg bones and ribs? They're chewed up, with U-shaped gouges that match crocodilian teeth. In a few sites, the damage lines up better with large mammal jaws. That's not theory. That's someone using a terror bird as a chew toy. So does that mean crocs were the real apexes, and the whole murder bird thing is overhyped? Not exactly, because apex predators still die. They break legs in a chase. They get infections. They lose brutal fights with rivals. They starve in a drought. And once you're down, the whole ecosystem stops caring how scary you used to be. Scavengers move in, and sometimes those scavengers are big enough to leave serious bite marks. See, being apex doesn't come with plot armor. It just means you don't have a consistent, specialized predator that hunts healthy adults as their main strategy. A full-grown terror bird in its prime probably didn't spend its day worrying about being ambushed by a croc on land. But slip in mud near the water's edge with a broken ankle? Different story. Then you're just meat with feathers. And if adults had it rough, juveniles had it worse. Let's imagine a fluffy, half-sized terror bird chick wandering a little too far from its parent. Suddenly, that same crocodile that would never risk attacking a 3-meter adult now sees an easy snack. Large predatory mammals, giant snakes, even other terror birds would have gone after the young. The same goes for those giant penguins and bony-toothed seabirds. In the water, smaller or younger individuals would have been on the menu for sharks, bigger fish, and marine reptiles that managed to hang on in cooler regions. And yes, these guys are all real. Fossil sites with mixed bones, tooth-scratched penguin limbs, and fragmented skulls show that even the ocean's top birds got recycled. This is the world of messy food webs, where today's nightmare hunter is tomorrow's calcium supplement. So, apex predators sit at the top of the hunting pyramid, but not outside the system. Their energy and nutrients still get cashed out into the rest of the community. When a terror bird dies, its body feeds crocs, mammals, vultures, insects, even fungi and microbes. The king still ends up back in the dirt. Which sets up the real twist. If even apex birds could be knocked down and eaten, what happens when the environment itself turns against them? Well, when the environment finally did turn against them, we didn't meet terror birds as living nightmares. We met them as piles of bones in the dirt. And at first, we didn't even believe what we were looking at. Let's imagine you're a paleontologist in the late 1800s in Argentina. You dig up a skull almost as long as your arm, with a beak shaped like a guillotine blade. You might think you found some kind of dwarf dinosaur, because what you actually find on the label your brain wants to slap on it is definitely not giant murder chicken. Early descriptions of phorusrhacids read like people trying very hard not to say, "This can't be a bird, right?" Same thing with the giant penguins. When the first bones of Kairuku-sized penguins came out of New Zealand and Antarctica, they looked too big, too heavy, too wrong. Penguins are supposed to be cute, cold-weather torpedoes, not human-sized torpedoes that could body-check you off a rock. Some early reconstructions basically turned them into bloated, upright barrels with flippers. And yes, these guys are all real. The first reconstructions of terror birds were honestly not that intimidating. Clumsy, oversized chickens with stiff legs and a sort of confused expression, like they'd lost a fight with gravity. As more skeletons showed up, with better preserved necks, hips, and feet, those cartoons had to go. You start to see powerful sprinting legs, a flexible S-curved neck, that hatchet beak aligned for downward strikes. Suddenly, the museum mount isn't a goofy bird. It's a dynamic predator you really don't want jogging toward you. The same glow-up happened in the water. Early giant penguin mounts looked like awkward, scaled-up emperor penguins. Now, with CT scans and more complete fossils, they're sleeker, more streamlined, with longer beaks and tighter bodies built to chase huge fish and squid. See, once you plug real muscle attachments and joint angles into the puzzle, fat bird in a tux turns into torpedo with teeth energy. You might think all of this was nailed down ages ago, but what you actually find is that most of these apex birds only joined science's cast list in the last 100 years or so. Many terror bird species were named in the mid-1900s. Some of the biggest penguins and bony-toothed seabirds. Recognized properly only in the last few decades. We're still arguing about their exact sizes, hunting styles, even how they moved. This is the world of constantly shifting deep-time history. Every new rock layer is basically a hard drive we haven't finished reading yet. Because our picture of the Avian Apex era is still updating, there's room for something even stranger than a 3-meter terror bird or a giant killer penguin hiding in the gaps. So, if this is what we've found with a handful of lucky fossils, what's still waiting in the rocks that could rewrite the story again? So, let's imagine you pause the fossil hunt and just look out your window instead. You might think you're as far from a 3-meter terror bird as it gets. It's just a sparrow on a power line, or a pigeon doing its little bobble walk near a hot dog stand. Harmless, background noise. Right? Now mentally, peel that pigeon like an X-ray and drop the skeleton of a terror bird onto it. Same basic blueprint. Lightweight bones, rigid spine, power-packed legs, a skull built around a beak that's basically a face-mounted multi-tool. Shrink that giant penguin we talked about down to the size of a lawn ornament, and you still keep the same torpedo body and flipper-powered hunting style. The shapes didn't vanish when the giants did. They just got scaled down and repurposed for your backyard. See, a lot of what looks cute is actually leftover predator software running on smaller hardware. That robin doing precision hop-hop stab on your lawn worms. That's a scaled-down version of a terror bird's targeting system, just aimed at invertebrates instead of small horses. Flocking starlings wheeling like smoke in the sky. That's coordinated movement to confuse attackers and surround food patches, the same kind of group tactics that once let seabird swarms strip fish schools near the surface. You might think songbirds are these delicate, artistic little seed dispensers, but what you actually find when you slow them down is a ton of violence. Tiny hawk-level dive bombs on intruders. Territorial screaming matches that are basically, leave or I end you. Even that hummingbird at your feeder is running high-speed dogfights for control of sugar resources. The scale is different. The attitude is not. And then, just to remind you, this isn't all hypothetical. Modern birds sometimes drop the act completely. Shrikes look like cute gray songbirds, but they impale mice and lizards on thorns and barbed wire, turning hedges into tiny horror movie sets. Peregrine falcons stoop out of the sky at over 300 kilometers an hour, turning into guided missiles that hit other birds mid-air. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of apex behavior, just squeezed into smaller, faster, more energy-efficient packages. Well, once you see that, the feeder outside your window stops being a peaceful snack bar and starts looking like a family reunion for a dynasty of killers. The sparrows, the pigeons, the gulls stealing your fries, they're all branches of a lineage that once produced the most formidable hunters on land and sea. The giants are gone, but the tricks that made them giants are still flying around your neighborhood. And here's the pattern interrupt. This isn't just a fun, birds are secretly scary fact. When you realize how much hidden history is packed into everyday animals, it changes how you read the entire living world. So as we pull back for the final recap, what does that do to your picture of Earth's past and your place in it? So let's imagine you rewind the planet like a VHS tape, all the way back to that bad day 66 million years ago. One rock falls, the sky burns, and in a geological blink, the non-avian dinosaurs and the giant marine reptiles are just gone. You might think the story ends there, but what you actually find is that the real plot twist is what moves into the empty throne. With the big reptile bosses deleted, Earth suddenly has vacant apex predator jobs on land and at sea. And yes, these guys are all real. Birds step up. In South America, cut off by oceans and still pretty light on big mammal carnivores, this is the world of terror birds. 3 meters tall, skull the size of your torso, a beak shaped like a guillotine. For tens of millions of years, if you were a medium-sized mammal down there, the scariest shadow wasn't a cat. It was a bird. On the other side of the world, New Zealand runs the same weird experiment. No native land mammals bigger than bats, forests full of chunky, flightless herbivores, and a climate that stays relatively mild. Evolution looks around and goes, well, someone's got to be the apex predator, and upgrades an eagle. Haast's eagle ends up with a wingspan bigger than a person is tall and talons that basically function as bear traps. You walk into the forest as a human-sized bird snack. Who signed off on that patch? And the oceans? They get their own avian takeover. In the early Cenozoic, before sharks and marine mammals really diversify into the forms you know, bony-toothed birds with 6-meter wingspans patrol the coasts, snatching up fish and smaller seabirds. Giant penguins, some as tall as an adult human, cruise through cold southern waters, hunting big fish and squid in seas that haven't yet filled up with orcas and leopard seals. For a while, if you dropped into a coastal food web, the top of the diagram had feathers. See, all these bird empires are running on the same settings: isolation, very few mammalian competitors, lots of prey, and climates that stay stable long enough for bodies to get bigger and hunting strategies to get more specialized. You might think birds are stuck as side characters once mammals show up, but give them a quiet, closed-off system, and they absolutely go off the rails. But windows like that don't stay open. Land bridges form. Mammals evolve into faster, tougher predators. Oceans cool and currents shift. And finally, humans arrive with fire, weapons, and way too much confidence. Terror birds vanish. Haast's eagle follows the moa into extinction. The giant seabirds and penguins lose their edge as sharks, seals, and whales take over. So when you look around today and see mammals on top, it feels normal. But it's actually just the latest regime. The killer bird era was real, just brief. The question now is, how do we know it happened in such detail? And what clues are still hiding in the rocks and bones under your feet? So when you hear Age of Mammals, you might think this was always the end game. Like evolution was just speedrunning dinosaurs, birds, everything else, to finally unlock modern Earth, now with extra humans. But what you actually find when you zoom out is that who runs the planet is way less destiny and way more dice roll. Let's imagine you could scrub through the last 100 million years like a timeline on your phone. You drag your finger a little, and suddenly the asteroid hits. Non-avian dinosaurs? Gone. Giant marine reptiles? Gone. In the chaos after, it's not some grand plan that puts birds on top. It's a weird mix of who survived by accident, which continents were stuck together, and who happened to evolve a good murder beak first. See, that's the uncomfortable part. Terror birds, the giant penguins, the bus-winged seabirds, all of them only became apex predators because the old bosses got deleted overnight. Our mammal-dominated world is just the current frame in a very long, very glitchy flipbook of who's in charge now. 50 million years ago, you'd point at a 3-meter phorusrhacid and say, that's the top land killer. Today, it's big cats and orcas. Give it another mass extinction, and it'll be someone else again. And the handoff can be fast. After the end Cretaceous, it took only a few million years, basically nothing in deep time, for birds to scale up into giant penguins spearing fish, bony-toothed monsters patrolling the open ocean, and land birds stomping mammals into the dirt. Power doesn't fade politely. It collapses, and then some totally different group sprints into the empty space like evolution just opened a Black Friday sale on apex niches. So where does that leave you? Sitting in a world where one primate is casually rewriting ecosystems on a geological speedrun. Human-driven extinctions aren't just losing some species. They're pulling pieces out of the Jenga tower that decides who even gets the chance to become huge, weird, and terrifying next. If you delete sharks, big cats, forest elephants, what steps up? Supersized predatory octopus? Giant invasive rats? Corvids evolving into urban terror birds that own the trash can savannas? You might think modern biodiversity feels stable because it's what you grew up with. But this is the world of temporary arrangements. Forests, reefs, grasslands, polar oceans. All of them are fragile, improvised truces between lineages that survived previous disasters. They look permanent only because your lifespan is tiny compared to the gap between asteroids. And yes, these guys are all real. The killer birds, the mammal upstarts, the whole rotating cast. The deeper lesson is that normal is just the current lineup of winners. Change the rules fast enough, and the roster flips. The scary question is, are we already triggering the next flip? And if we are, can we actually see the first clues hiding in those rocks and bones before everything rearranges again? So, let's imagine you're back on that plane again, or floating in that quiet, glassy ocean. You feel the light dim. You look up, and you brace for a T-Rex, or a saber-toothed cat, or maybe some giant crocodile. You might think you know the script by now, but what you actually find blotting out the sky is a bird, a 3-meter terror bird pacing toward you on the pampas, skull the size of your torso, beak shaped like a guillotine, or a bony-toothed seabird gliding overhead, wingspan longer than a car, circling like a vulture that decided it wanted a whole dolphin instead of scraps, or you're waist-deep in a cold New Zealand forest stream when a Haast's eagle drops through the canopy, talons spread, locking onto you the way it once locked onto moas. This is the world of birds as the top predators. And yes, these guys are all real. If you could actually visit one moment in that Avian Apex era, where are you going first? Do you walk out onto Eocene South American grasslands and watch a phorusrhacid sprint down some unlucky mammal that still looks a bit confused about having survived the dinosaurs? Do you dive into those ancient, predator-poor seas and swim next to a 2-meter penguin that hunts like a compact torpedo? Or do you pick the islands, stand in the dim beach forest, and wait for the shadow of Haast's eagle to slide silently over the ferns? Tell me in the comments, which killer bird is your apex predator now? Did the terror birds win you over? Or did the giant penguins quietly steal the show? Was it the idea of open oceans ruled by wings instead of fins? Or the realization that on islands, one eagle could sit where big cats and wolves sit today? I really want to see which moment broke your mental picture of what a bird is supposed to be. And while you're down there, throw in the thing that surprised you most. Was it how fast birds rushed into those empty dinosaur jobs after the extinction? How often islands and polar edges turned into bird kingdoms whenever mammals lagged behind? Or just the fact that our modern pigeons and crows are basically the scrappy leftovers of a much weirder, much more dangerous bird dynasty. Because we barely scratched this, we could do a full deep dive on one terror bird species and how its skull worked like a built-in bone crusher, or an episode just on giant penguins and why they got huge and then vanished as marine mammals muscled in. Or we could zoom out and look at other post-extinction experiments where evolution went, what if we made the herbivores terrifying this time? So, if the idea of birds as world-dominating predators actually changed how you see the gulls, vultures, or backyard crows staring at you right now, hit like, subscribe, and share this with the one friend who still thinks birds are just cute. See, the more we dig into these lost worlds, the easier it gets to spot the next big flip before it's already on top of us. So before you click away and go back to your very mammal-centric day, look up for a second. Let's imagine you're just walking to the bus stop and you hear that soft rush of wings over your head. You might think, oh, just a pigeon, and keep scrolling your phone. But what you actually find, if you know the history, is a survivor of a dynasty that once produced apex killers. Every flap you hear, every quick shadow that skims across the sidewalk, is coming from a body built on the same blueprint that made terror birds and giant eagles. No, that crow is not going to sprint you down in a parking lot, but it is moving with joints, tendons, and a brain that were all tuned, for millions of years, to hunting. See, your neighborhood gull is basically a tiny, trash-eating ghost of a world where birds were the top land predators, not just sandwich thieves. And they're still watching. From the trees, from the shorelines, from the power lines over your head where they line up like a feathery jury. We like to pretend they forgot that era, that evolution hit reset and gave them a cute rebrand, but those nervous little head tilts and laser-accurate dives, that's what it looks like when a lineage keeps the reflexes of a killer and just swaps out baby ground sloth for dropped French fry. So, what does that do to how you see your own place in the story? You live in a world where mammals run the show, where the biggest predators are cats, bears, or, let's be honest, humans with industrial fishing fleets. You might think that was always the plan, that evolution was just patiently waiting for us to show up and start building cities. But from Earth's point of view, we're just the latest weird experiment. There is nothing inevitable about us being in charge, and absolutely nothing guaranteed about us staying that way. Let's imagine a different skyline for a second. The same city, the same sunset. A flock of ordinary birds lifts off a rooftop and crosses the sun, just black silhouettes against the light. For a heartbeat, your brain does a double take. Wings stretch wider, bodies get taller, necks and beaks sharpen into hatchets and hooks. The V-shape of geese warps into a squadron of giant eagles and sprinting terror birds, gliding over a planet where hooves and paws are the ones hiding. Then you blink, and it's just pigeons and crows again. The spell breaks, but the past doesn't. This is the world of deep time, where Earth has already hosted ecosystems as strange as any sci-fi you can stream. For a while, the monsters had feathers, and they ruled the forests, coasts, and open oceans. So the next time a shadow passes over you and your instincts make you look up a little too fast, remember, you're not just seeing a bird. You're seeing what happens when the sky gets a turn at the top. And if you want to meet more of those lost worlds, stick around, subscribe, And keep looking up.